Welcome to MyLife, Chassidus Applied, episode 161. Let's begin, as we usually do, Leib mit der Zeit, living with the times, which is not the New York Times, and it's not with any other contemporary media, but it's with the eternal, both timeless and timely messages from the Torah, Torah's Chaim, the Torah of life, as the Rebbe said again and again, Hayra b'chaim, a directive, a lesson in life. More than any other statement repeated by the Rebbe is that Torah is Meloshen Hayra, directive, meaning a relevant directive to life, which of course we take the cue from that, Chassidus Applied, the application of Chassidus to our personal lives, and Torah in general, of course based on the principle that Torah is meant to be, and especially Chassidus, an application that relates to our personal, psychological, emotional, spiritual lives and all the issues and challenges that we deal with. Basically saying that God sent every soul down to this earth, but didn't send it alone into this difficult and hostile universe. It sent it also, so God sent each one of us with it gave us all the power to access a blueprint, basically a life operator's manual that will guide us and help us through the darkness, through the dark roads and journeys of this world, to be able to know what is the right thing to do, how to live the most wholesome life, the healthiest life, the most Jewish life, the most Chassidic life, the life that lives up to the purpose for which each of us was created. So it's always good to time review the mission, review the objective, and hence we are in episode 161 and continuing to receive your questions, continuing to receive your comments. We just finished recently a third annual essay contest, which I do every week at the end of the close of the program, 3 essays of your voice in your applying Chassidus to a particular challenge. And with that, let us go to something of this time. So where are we now? We are Sunday, the first day of Parshas Emor, the Parsha in Sefer Vayikra, the Parsha Emor. This week we'll also be honoring the 65th yartzeit of the Rebbe's brother, Rabbi Yisroel Aryeh Leib, and Yud Gimmel Iyar, as well as Pesach Sheini, the next day, Pesach Sheini, the second Pesach, the second chance that Hashem gave to the Jewish people when they left Egypt, that those that could not bring the Korban Pesach would have an opportunity in its time, which means in Nisan, during the first Pesach, would have the opportunity in Pesach Sheini to bring that Korban. So we'll talk about these and lessons to our lives from these events. And then go into some questions that you've been posing. Here's a good opportunity. If you have a question, if you have a comment, anything you'd like to share, you can do so completely anonymously at our forum at meaningfullife.com/mylife. So, Parsha Emor, there are many different themes. The first, most obvious theme is that this is the Parsha where we read about V'sfartim lechem b'mochros HaShabbos, the Sfiras HaEmor, which we are right now in the month that is completely consumed from beginning to end with the counting of Emor, which is this week's Parsha. We read that mitzvah. It began the second day, B'mochros HaShabbos means B'mochros HaPesach, the second day of Pesach, and concludes right into Shavuos, the 50th day from that count, from that 49-day count. We know that from a point of view of applying that to our lives, besides the fact that the count is we're commemorating the counting that the Yidden did, firstly in order to bring the Sfiras, the lechem korban lechem hasheni that was brought on Shavuos was 50 days from the time that they count. But that's a Beis Hamikdash thing. Relevant to us is the famous Ran, the end of Masechet Pesachim, that when the Jews left Mitzrayim, out of great anticipation, gaguyim and yearning, they counted down to Shavuos. So of course, on a very basic level, the lesson of the excitement and the passion and the anticipation of receiving the mandate, the blueprint, as I said, the blueprint for life. And every year that's renewed, we receive it anew, and as such we count into anticipation. But Chassidus takes it to another level. That this count, as we say every day, they talk about the refinement of each of the 49, 7 times 7 emotional attributes, the refinement of each of those attributes. So for Sfartim technically means to count, but the Pardes of the Ramak in the Sefer Pardes writes that the word Sfira, and Sfira, of course, we all know the Sfiras, the supernal spheres, which are the Sfiras, they're names for the divine attributes from Chochmah through Malchus, the 10 divine attributes with which, so-called the instruments with which God creates the universe, and Nishtalshel Mehem, from that evolves our 10 faculties. So the word Sfira comes from counting, Svartim. It also comes from the word Sipur, to relate a story, a narrative, like Sipur Yotziris Mitzrayim, a story, a narrative. And finally, the third interpretation from the word sapphire, Even Sapir in Hebrew. According to some opinions, most opinions, the luchas that the Moshe brought was sapphire stone. The sapphire is a lustrous, is a illuminating stone. So sapphire from the word illumination or transparence, and hence Chassidus explains the Ramak at length in Ayin Beis from Volume 1 and other places that in the spheres there's those three elements. The spheres count; they give us essentially the number as a number of the divine energy that is manifest in existence. On a deeper level, they tell a story, they tell the divine story, the divine narrative in existence. And on the deepest level, the spheres are transparent channels that reveal the divine that is even beyond that the number and the story, the highest levels of the divine within existence. So when we count the spheres Emor, we're doing V'sfartem Lachem in this week's Parsha, we're doing exactly the same thing. There's the count, there's telling a story, and there's the refinement that ultimately brings to a illumination, that we illuminate our midas. So counting means you count down, as I mentioned, out of yearning. You count chesed shebechesed, love shebe, and you account for that. Maybe account and account are connected. You account, you evaluate that particular emotional attribute that's respective to that particular day. And then there's a second part that tells a story. It tells the story of your psyche. It tells the story of your soul. It tells the story of the attributes that you have within you. And then finally, there's the third element, that it actually becomes an illuminating force. Because when you refine a midah, it becomes a shining. It's like polishing a stone, a sapphire stone. It becomes illuminating. So it's not just telling a story. It becomes an illuminating force in your life, an illumination. Both that you illuminate that particular attribute, and two, that you mavada it, you refine it and polish it to improve it. It should function to its most efficient state, in its most efficient manner. Interestingly, this has a connection also to the beginning of the parsha, Emor v'amarta, as Rashi says, lahazir hagdelim alaktanim. That was the double Emor v'amarta. Is talking about the Kahanim should not just do follow the instructions they were given, but also to lahazir, to make sure and protect. Lahazir literally means to warn, but to prevent and to make sure that the older people, the older Kahanim, instruct the younger ones. But the interesting word here is not lachanech, not to educate, it's lahazir. So on one hand, lahazir means a type of warning. It's like telling strictly to the younger children of the Kahanim that these are the things you need to be careful of, and this is how you are supposed to remain pure and not become impure. But the Rebbe explains lahazir, based on Chassidus and another number of places, lahazir also has the word zohar in it. Lahazir means to illuminate, which takes on a whole different meaning. Lahazir could be to warn, to protect, to give us a stern warning, to prevent us from doing something that can be damaging. But lahazir, with the word lahazir, means also to illuminate. So in chinuch, it's not just sufficient in education to instruct, to guide, or to even warn of the pitfalls and the dangers in life, sur mara, avoiding the negative, but it's critical that the chinuch be infused with radiance, with a glow, with illumination. As we all know, when an education is filled with illumination, and it isn't just about stern warnings and strict rules, then you know that it will be retained and will be embraced in a passionate and personal way. So lahazir adds that dimension. Similar to this sphere is not just counting, not just telling the story, but sapir, svartim from the word sapir as transparency and illumination. So of course there's also the name of the Zohar, which we'll talk about next week, like Ba'emer is next Sunday, that's the day of the Rashbi, which also comes from the word illumination and brilliance. So we have from there this number of lessons that in Yiddishkeit, the key way to make sure that it's maintained, the way to make sure that it will be embraced and it'll be perpetuated, is not just to bark orders and not just to count numbers and mechanically, or even tell a story, but to make sure it's always illuminated. And you see, you can tell a story in a very dry and hollow way. You can count the days in a very empty, mechanical fashion by rote, or you can infuse it with an illumination that everyone hearing it is like excited. You tell a story, someone is a good storyteller, tells it in a captivating way that stimulates, that illuminates, that inspires. So it's a very practical, but also a fundamental lesson in education in general, and in general all mitzvahs, not just the mitzvah of Sfira, but to make it leichtendik, a leichtendike mitzvah. As Chassidus explains, it says, tshuva u'maisim tevim, yofer shah achas b'tshuva maisim tevim. 1 hour of tshuva and good deeds in this world is more greater than the entire Chai Elam Haba, the entire world to come. So Chassidus, what's maisim tevim? So it says, maisim tevim u'meirim. They're good deeds and ones that illuminate and shine. And Chassidus uses so many examples regarding Iyar, that when you're a lampshadnik, when you're a lamplighter, and when you're giving off light, how it attracts, how it draws people. Of course, it illuminates and it warms. So light has all those elements, and the message in Emor and Amarta is Lahazir and Svartem, all about that type of illumination, not just to do the minimum, but to do it in a way that illuminates. Every one of us can envision that when we were illuminated, not just instructed, not just guided, it had a completely different type of experience and completely different type of impact. And that's what remains with us, those illuminating experiences. With that, let us move into the Rabbi Yisroel Aryeh Leib. So, it's the 65th yartzeit. It passed away in Tofshin Yud Beis, Gimmel Iyar. And we talked about this in episode 115, so I'm not going to go over what I discussed then. Then I reviewed a zettel, a note that the Rebbe wrote and said on that day, or close to that day, maybe the end of Shiva, if I recall correctly. And if you go, you can refer back to that episode, which again can be accessed at our landing page that has all the MyLife resources you need, and that is meaningfullife.com/MyLife. Episode 115 is an archived episode, and there you can find many details where I reviewed it. I don't need to do that again because I did it then. We reviewed the Rebbe's interesting, fascinating, with chidushim about Yeridat Tzedek Aliyah, which hints somewhat to some mysterious and unknown life of Rabbi Yisroel Aryeh Leib, and how everything is always going toward an Aliyah, and that he's an inspiration in that fashion. So that was in Tavshin Yud Beis. The Rebbe did not make much reference to his brother and his yartzeit until Tavshin Lamed Aleph, which was Shabbos Pasha Achri Gdeshim, which was Yud Gimmel Iyar, or a day before Yud Gimmel Iyar, I'm not positive. And the Rebbe referred to it. And then the later years, the beginning of the middle mems, the Rebbe started referring to it much more often, spoke about it, and taught us the lesson of Yisroel Aryeh Leib, how the name indicates on the battles that we have in this world, and the transformation of the darkness to light, which is Aryeh Leib, both in the Hebrew and in the Yiddish. In jargon, Leib is a translation of Aryeh, a lion, the power of a lion that comes through transformation through tshuva. And the different lessons the Rebbe taught us about this. I believe I mentioned this back in episode 115, but if not, an interesting anecdote, that when Professor Rosenblum, the mathematician who would come to Fabrengens, was once by Fabrengens in the Mems, and the Rebbe, he came over between the sikhs, was talking to the Rebbe was encouraging him, and actually really requesting in a very passionate way that he publish the manuscript, a mathematical treatise written by an individual, and it didn't say who it was. And in the middle, the Rebbe says to him, so the Rebbe, Professor Rosenblum says, I'll give it to someone, they'll edit it, and so on. And the Rebbe says, I don't want to tell you who it is, because then you'll feel that you have to do it. But then the Rebbe goes ahead and does tell him who it is. He says, it's from my brother. It's from the only things that we have from him that remain. It's very precious to me. I'll pay for it, the Rebbe says. And of course, Professor Rosenblum, in response, says, absolutely, he'll do it. And the Rebbe asked him about it. He says, well, he wrote it in a way, because he had reviewed it already. He wrote it in a way that did not have footnotes or cross-references. So the Rebbe said, that was the style of my brother. He had his clarity. He had, the Rebbe's words were, when he had an idea, he put it down. And he would not look and research. That has to be done afterwards. And I hope you'll do it, he asks Professor Rosenblum. And then the Rebbe says this expression, which I think is something we really can take out of. He said, my brother the word he used was zealous about his independence. Essentially suggesting, in other words, that this writing, he just did it his independent way, not necessarily conforming to the standards of the time. He was zealous about his independence. One cannot help wonder whether the Rebbe himself is in the same fashion. And I say independence, of course, independence meant being a voice of a generation which is a true leader. And independence, of course, not independence from Hashem's will, but independence not conforming to other people's standards and just being the pioneer, which is the hallmark of Avraham Avinu, Moshe Rabbeinu, all the great leaders, zealous about his independence. So in a positive way, that means that each of us has an individual voice, an individual song, and it's critical that we express it in this world, because Hashem, God, blessed each of us with a unique mission to fulfill that you and only you can fulfill. And often we lose sight of that by becoming conformist, or having to toe the line, or please others, or afraid to rock the boat. And it's vital, and this perhaps is a great lesson from Yisroel Aryeh Leib, and his name as well, with a passion, with a lion type of strength and leadership, that each in our own way should forge ahead and use our unique skills to make a dira b'tachtenim, and in every possible way, in transforming this world into a dira b'tachtenim, into a home, a dwelling place for the divine. Pesach Sheini. So here's a question: what is the practical relevance of Pesach Sheini in our lives? Jews always have a second chance and the opportunity to do tshuva. So what does Pesach Sheini add to this message? Very good question. So we have, of course, the famous Hayom Yom of this day of Pesach Sheini, and from the Sichos of the Frierdiker Rebbe, and the Rebbe speaks about it extensively, that Pesach Sheini teaches us in Shtokim Farfal, that there's nothing lost. How do we learn that? Because as the Pasuk says in Parsha Ba'aleischa, where it tells us the mitzvah of Pesach Sheini, that if a person during the Pesach Rishon, meaning on the 14th and the 15th of Nisan, 14th of Nisan, when the Pesach was brought in the Beis Hamikdash, was b'derech recheka, was distant away from you, because you have to bring the korban in Yerushalayim by the Beis Hamikdash. So it was derech recheka, means in a distant road, not near Yerushalayim. Or was tamei, was impure, that also disqualifies you from bringing the korban. Nevertheless, the mitzvah Pesach Sheini says even that person could also bring a korban a month later. So it teaches us the lesson that even if you're distant or tamei, spiritually speaking, there's shtokim farfal, nothing lost. Okay, beautiful lesson. However, the obvious question is, isn't that tshuva? All tshuva is that way. That even if, God forbid, a person did something wrong, they have a second chance. They can do tshuva. So the Rebbe, in two places, and perhaps more, but two that I'll point out, answers this question. What's unique about Pesach Sheini? What he says is, first I'll give you the sources. This is the Sikh of Achri Gdeshim Tovshin Chav Daled, printed down, Likutei Sichos, volume 18, page 119 and on. And the Sikh of Achan Shal Pesach Tovshin Chav Ches, which was right after the 6-day war. He talked about the Korban Pesach in Yerushalayim that year, and that's published in volume 12 of Likutei Sichos, page 217. And the point the Rebbe makes is a very fascinating point, that there's different levels of tshuva. There's the basic level of a tshuva where a person does something wrong, and the tshuva is the capacity to correct. But what happens if a person does something b'mezid? They do something deliberately. And more than that, echte v'ashuv, they say, I will sin and do tshuva. So it says, Ema speaking b'yad l'asher tshuva. You can't do tshuva on something like that because it's tega nasis and ego. You can't use tshuva as a cause to do a sin and then expect that tshuva can repair that. Just like a prosecutor can't become a defense attorney. And can tega nasis and ego. So then comes a higher level, and that says what the Alter Rebbe says in Tanya, Perek Chafei, and in L'Geras HaTshuva, that im dochak, even a person who echte v'ashuv, who said that I will sin and do tshuva, if he really pushes and is persistent, he could also open up the door of tshuva. The Rebbe explains this is the level of Pesach Sheini. Pesach Sheini is even if it's b'mezid, not just by accident, even if it's intentional. The Rebbe says, doesn't say anywhere, a person, for example, who by mistake was in the wrong, was distant, or was tamei, not by his volition. So the Pesach Sheini. But what about if a person b'mezid, and he could have prevented it? Even that person can bring a Pesach Sheini. So the tshuva of Pesach Sheini that teaches us, Nishtakim Farfalm, is all circumstances. not just the general idea of tshuva. You can look it up there. It talks more of the details of it, that there's actually 3 opinions on what Pesach Sheini is. Opinion that it's a takanta, it's a tikkun, that as soon as Pesach solution was given, right away the Eibishter said, here's a tikkun, in case someone can't do it, here's another. Another opinion is that it's tashlumin, it's like fulfills, it can complement that which was not done Pesach. And a third opinion that's a regel b'fnei atzmei, that Pesach Sheini is a yontav b'fnei atzmei no matter what, even for tzaddikim, which is another lesson that's unique. Tzaddikim also do tshuva, not tshuva and avoda, like it says, not like Tasa Elam, the mistake of the world, the Kutateta says, that tshuva is only on sins. Tshuva is also for everybody because it's Ruach HaToshav Elokim Asher Nasana. It's the idea of getting closer, tshuva from the word return, returning to your source. So the Pesach Sheini also has that lesson. So on both extremes, Pesach Sheini has a level of tshuva on all levels, and based on those 3 opinions. Whereas tshuva itself, it can be a limited form. That's the lesson. So bottom line for all of us is, we're far from perfect. We have our shortcomings. We have our mistakes that we've made. Some of them unintentionally, some of them deliberately. Pesach Sheini teaches instruction for. Why? Because the soul ultimately is never damaged and never affected in its core level by our behavior. That's why we say neshama shenasata bi tahirihi. The soul that you've instilled in me, you've given me, is pure. You say that no matter what. It doesn't say anywhere you don't say that because, God forbid, there was a sin, or whatever type of sin. I once asked a rabbi who does not hold from Chassidus, to put it mildly, and he says, dealing with all these Jews that are completely impure and then unclean and bali aveda, so I said to him, you're a Rav Pesach, let me ask you a question. If a Jew like that comes to you as a shayla with a question, he says, and he's done kol dover asa, in your opinion, everything that's prohibited, and he wants to daven tomorrow morning for whatever reason, do you tell him to say neshama shenasata b'tahiri or not? Or you could say he shouldn't be saying that prayer, that the soul you give me is pure because you say it's not pure. So he smiled. He said, no, of course. So I said, so you're saying yourself that the neshama is pure. This doesn't mean on the levels of ata barasa and ata yatzarta, ata nefachtabi, and of course ata meshamre bikirbi. We need protection in this world, and the neshama needs protection. Obviously, on those layers and those levels, things can have an effect, an impact, and we have to work on preventing that or repairing it. But never think there's something that's completely, that there's always a pilot flame, always a core element of the neshama that is not impacted by this, and that's why there is always hope. This, I would say, in essence, is the most powerful message that I would submit to the therapeutic world. That belief in a person, that anything that happened to you, anything that you did, does not damage the core. It can damage the channels, and it could have a lot of impact, and it could dramatically affect a person's life in very profound ways. But never, ever give up for a moment on that core element of soul. So Nishtokin Farfalm. And Pesach Sheini teaches us that on all the levels. Okay. With that, let us move to some questions. There's some that I was going to talk about previous weeks. Time limits didn't allow me to do that, so we'll go in order here. Next question. Can creativity be taught even to someone who isn't naturally creative? Learning how to access chachma, creativity, properly. And here's the question, or several versions of a question of this in this category. How can people nurture and develop attributes that don't come naturally to them? I recognize within myself that I have a very hard time accessing my chachma, my creativity, my ability to conceive and innovate new ideas. While I often think of myself as more analytical, I know my life suffers by not being more capable of chachma inspiration. What exercises can I do to open my mind to be more creative? Is creativity innate or can it be learned? Hi, Rabbi Jacobson. Thank you for drawing the waters of Chassidus from the wellsprings and sharing it with us on a weekly basis. You have no idea how energizing and beneficial the classes are. I recognize within myself that I have a very hard time accessing my chachma, my inquisitiveness and openness or creativity to new ideas. What can I do to open my mind to be creative and reach out of box type of thinking? Thank you. So 2 similar questions, the same category, and I'm sure many of us have similar questions regarding even broader than just chachma, in general talent. So obviously there are innate gifts and talents that we are born with, whether it's creative and musical talents or artistic ones, or some of us, yes, are more Bina-oriented, more analytical. Before we get to Bina, let's talk about more cerebral, and others are more intuitive or emotional. And this is not about being right or wrong. People have different strengths. Some are more chachma, more innovative, but not so good at fleshing out. Others are excellent at Bina, Mevin Dover, Mitech Dover, to take an idea and develop it into a comprehensive plan. You find many companies actually have two people usually close to the top, where one is stronger in one area, in the chachma, other in the Bina. So there's no question there's innate talents and inclinations and predispositions that define who we are, which include genetic and hereditary elements, and also include osmosis, which we're exposed to, and becomes hergel nasa teva sheni early on, whether it's our parents' styles, besides what we inherit, the actual gene, our parents' styles, our educational systems, and others that affected us in our early impressionable years. So that goes without saying. The question is, are we stuck there? So obviously the answer is no, especially from a Chassidic point of view. We talked earlier about Tzviras Emor. It's about refining your midas. You could be born with a natural inclination to a lot of chesed, and gvuris doesn't come so easy to you, so you work on that as we grow and mature. Or the other way around, someone who's much more gvuridik and not so chesed. And the same with all the 7 attributes. Can you fundamentally change your colors and change your stripes? No, because that's not the kavanah. Even though, which is another discussion why Chassidus says the Chassidus came to L'shanas Teva Midesav or Midas Ativim. So that needs an explanation. But generally speaking, we don't change our personalities. What we can do is harness, direct, channel. That's the goal. To take that personality and place it in a different direction, re-guide it. Which of course makes it much more realistic than someone going, I'm going to change. And because we were created, yes, in the divine image, we all have the image, divine attributes within us, as I mentioned earlier. Now, methods of so-called growing in that area require certain methodologies that Chassidus talks about. Chassidus talks about, for example, Kabbalah Sale. The idea that it's not just about you, but doing what Hashem wants. So taking that and applying that means that even though you have an inclination to do it this way, but you look at Shulchan Aruch, Code of Jewish Law, or you talk to a Rav, or you talk to a mashpia, and you see, this is an area that I need to work on, and therefore you go against your inclination, or you curb it, or you channel it, because Kabbalah Sel, because that's what Hashem wants. Another methodology is Yigia, effort. You see people, for example, who may not have such good minds, but they are misyageh, they struggle and exert themselves, and they achieve places that people with greater minds than they cannot achieve. So yigia, effort, diligence, commitment. Never underestimate the power of that. That sweat goes a lot more than pure talent and skill. Obviously, if you have both, that's even better. So these are just 2 things. To drive the point a little more deeper, Chassidus brings a concept in Samach Vav and other places that there's 2 types of helam. Helam sheyeshne b'mitzias, helam she'ein b'mitzias. What does that mean? A concealment that is there beneath the surface, but you can't see it, but it's accessible. And then there's a helam she'ein b'mitzias, means a concealed state where you can't even access it because it's fundamentally concealed. To use the example given for this, the difference, for example, between a hot coal, which is a shalheves kshuda b'gacheles or kznuza b'gacheles. So you look at a hot coal, it may look to you like it's completely not on fire. There's no flame, but you get a little closer, you feel the warmth. God forbid you touch it. You put something near it. You fan it. So that's a helam sheyesh mitzvah. It's concealed, but it's there. It's alive. The coal is not a cold coal. The coal has not been extinguished. And if you throw that coal into water, it will be extinguished. The second example of a helam she'ein mitzvah is a tzura chalomish, is a flintstone. A flintstone, you strike 2 stones and it releases a spark. That spark is not there concealed. If you touch the stone, it's not hot. If you throw it into water, it does not eliminate its power to release a spark, and so on. So it's a helam, but it's so concealed that you have no way of accessing it right now. So how do you access it? You need exertion. When you strike it, when you strike a stone with a lot of power, it can release a spark, and that spark can create a flame. With a coal, it's hidden, but you don't need to strike it. You need to fan it, and other things that you can do, but it doesn't take that same type of effort. So the way this can be explained and applied to our discussion here, we all have in our neshama far more capabilities than we think we have. Even if you are a chachma type of person, you can be wired to a certain amount, but through Kabbalah sale and exertion, you can actually reach into what Chassidus and Kabbalah calls chachmas tema'ah, where you're able to access even more creativity, but that takes effort, exertion, like reaching the flintstone, where you strike, and striking here is yagiyah, effort. Kabbalah sale also has that same element. Kabbalah sale, accepting the yoke, a certain pressure releases, turns coal into diamonds. Pressure releases the oil from the olive. You need to press it. And the same thing in life, pressure brings out those deeper things. Now, slighter pressure is like the coal, so you fan it and you do a little and you can bring something up. But if you want to reach deeper resources, you need those two, Kabbalah sale and Yagiyah. So even if one person is more wired like a Bina person and wants to develop a little more creativity, it's true, it may not be your particular strength, but it doesn't mean it's impossible. To do that, you need to exert yourself more, and you need to put in effort. Often you need to be challenged by someone who, let's say, be part of a think tank, or you're an incubator, where you see people are brainstorming, and you see how others are coming up with ideas. To not to be self-serving, but to take the MyLife Chassidus essay contest. By submitting an essay, you have to exert yourself, you're competing with others, you have to come up with an idea, you have to develop that idea. These are efforts, these efforts is what bring the best out of us. So that what I'm saying to sum up is that we're all born with innate talent. Some of it emerges on its own, some of it will just naturally naturally emerge as we grow. But some of it, if you want the deeper levels of it, even the things you're inclined to, and especially the things you're not so inclined to, you need to have something to dig deeper, something to reach deeper. And the two main methods is Kabbalah sale, and the second method is Yagiyah. And they could be Haba because the Eibishter wants us to struggle and to make an effort, which of course is so much foundational in the Rebbe's approach. Avoda b'keach atzmei, he's not going to do it for us. We have to do something. And that, when you do, brings out a certain depth and quality that cannot be brought out, that someone can give, that does not express when someone else gives it to you. Okay. Next question. Isn't abstaining from enjoying God's beautiful world an affront to God? How can abstaining from enjoying God's beautiful world be a way of serving Him? Dear Rabbi Jacobson, I love your weekly lectures. I'm a Balas Tshuva from the late 70s. And I've raised kids and grandchildren in Crown Heights. I love Chabad teachings and the way of life, and have dedicated my life to God and our Rebbe's teachings. But I have a very difficult time with the idea of abstaining from enjoying God's beautiful world as a way of serving Him. God created a beautiful sensual world. The colors, the smells, tastes, the sensations, etc. are there for our benefit. When I look at and smell a beautiful rose bush, I think of what a visually beautiful and amazing scented world God made. When I have a delicious food or drink, I thank Him for the wonderful tastes He created and our taste buds, which allow us to appreciate it. When I wear beautiful clothes, I thank Him for the opportunity He gives me to have the sensation of the exquisite cloths and the appearance it gives me. Watching a beautiful sunset or sunrise, hiking along beautiful trails, swimming, and so on. It's all a celebration of life and the beautiful world God created. Abstaining from the world He created seems antithetical to serving Him and appreciating the beautiful world He created. It almost seems an affront to Him. Did He really create such an amazingly rich and diverse world for us to eat dry bread with salt and sleep on the hard floor? Didn't He create a world to be generous with His creations and benefit them with His goodness and kindness? Isn't it almost a proverbial slap in His face to abstain from it? Thank you so much for the work you do and for all the teachings. So there we have. Great question. Because this is a topic that we have addressed a few weeks ago, which was about sanctifying yourself with what is permissible, and maybe that was what provoked the question, so I want to go back to that and, of course, also address this question as well, as a follow-up to episode 159, 2 weeks ago. Rabbi Jacobson, in episode 159, you discussed the competing ideas of Kaddish Atzmacha b'mutalach, which means to sanctify yourself, even the things that are permitted, and not abstaining from the permissible. I have a thought I'd like to share and hear your thoughts. Because on the other hand, I also spoke about that's enough with God. What the Torah forbade you. You don't need to add new for prohibitions. I'd like to suggest that these ideas aren't mutually exclusive. I think of this as the difference of when to be strict, machmir, and when to beautify, mahadir. God put us in this world to make it into a dwelling place for Him. This happens when we utilize the permissible in His service, whether in mitzvah observance or in our mundane daily lives. The more mundane or lowly the permissible item we use in His services, the better. If we can use rich meat, tasty wines, fine clothes, etc. in the service of Hashem, thus making His name known in the world a more godly place, then we should. The catch is that when we engage with the material of this world, and it brings us pleasure and distracts us from His service, we're bound to get sidetracked with the enjoyment and pleasure of the material and forget about serving God. So we have a balancing act. On the one hand, elevating all aspects of the material world, hidur, beautifying the world as God's home, thus engaging in all permissible aspects of this world in His service, and on the other hand, abstaining enough so we don't become ensnared in the enjoyment and pleasure and get distracted. Be machmer ourselves, kadesh asmacha b'mutalach. Generally, we see that it takes special people, whether Rabbi Yisroel of Ruzhin or the Rebbe Marash, who knew how to utilize extreme wealth and bounty for Hashem. But we can also learn from them, and when Hashem blesses us with material blessings, it is our opportunity and responsibility to seek to use as much as we can in His service and for His glory. Hopefully we are good custodians, and He continues to entrust more and more wealth and blessing with us to do good. Is there any truth in this idea? Thank you for your ongoing lessons and pearls of wisdom. A second comment, or sort of a question comment. 2. The Yom of Chavzayin Nissen, that was the day when we actually was episode 159, and I neglected to mention that. It's in regard to Kadesh Asmacha B'Mutalach, says the following. The permissible when done for one's pleasure is completely evil, as the Alter Rebbe writes in Tanya, chapter 7. For we are commanded, sanctify yourself with what is permitted to you. Kadesh Asmacha B'Mutalach. One must introduce sanctity into those matters that are permissible, so that they serve the purpose of enhancing one's Torah, mitzvahs, fear of God, and good character traits. So, Affront actually spoke about that topic on that day. So how do we reconcile all of this? So some of it I discussed then, but I wanted to take this further and especially answer the first question about the beauty of this world. So here, Chassidus is a tremendous asset to really put perspective, give us perspective on this matter. It's absolutely true. Elam al miluye nivra. God created a world in a perfect way. So when we look at the world, I talked pre-Chet Eitzadas, when Adam and Eve were placed in the Garden of Eden, there was a world that was a beautiful, perfect world that didn't have any negative stuff in it. As the Shalosh says on Chassidus cites, Klippa was Shemer Lepri. Yes, there were fruits. We know there were fruits in the Garden of Eden, whether it was an orange or an apple or other type of trees. There was a klippa, but klippa was not a negative thing. All it does, its role was very focused, to protect the fruit. What happened when they ate from the Eitz Hadas? And that's really the key to this whole discussion. The Eitz Hadas, Chassidus explains, a change of consciousness took place, which interestingly is reversed when Mashiach comes. We get back to that original consciousness. What's the change of consciousness? Instead of a world recognizing and knowing that this is God's beautiful world, a gan, Basiligani, a garden, Gan Eden, a beautiful world, which is all expressing, like Kol Mashabara Kodesh Baruch Hu B'Elam Elei Bara El L'Chfeidei, a world where everything that was created in it is L'Chfeidei, to honor and glorify God, including the beauty of nature, including all the beauties that were described so eloquently in these letters that you sent me. All that is perfect. It's aligned with the purpose. But Chet Eitzadah, suddenly the human being with free will was able to create a schism between the existence and its purpose. Now the tree of knowledge was meant to be a tree that you avoid, at least till Shabbos, according to the opinion that it was a vine. But so now that you went ahead and you used it for what you shouldn't be using it, you created a schism. Here's an object, it's beautiful, to look at, not beautiful to eat from. Other objects are meant to be used, each one in its own way. So imagine a person seeing mushrooms in the Garden of Eden. Mushrooms, that's not what you were told to eat. And they say, you know what, they look delectable. And you taste it and you find out it's a poisonous mushroom. Is that poisonous mushroom part of God's beautiful world? Absolutely, as long as you don't eat from it. There are things to be looked at, beautiful flowers that are not edible. There are many things in this world that are very beautiful, but it's not meant to be ingested and digested. There are other things that are meant. So what we have here is a beautiful world when it's aligned and you use every part of that world for what's purpose. Then, exactly as the first questioner wrote, that, of course, abstaining from that is an affront to God. That's why we have brachas that we make. We make brachas when we see new fruit, when we eat new fruit, when we make new brachas, when we see flowers blossoming. There's brachas to be made on Ma'aseh Bereshis. And different brachas, we make even a bracha on thunder and lightning. All to describe these are parts of God's glory, when you understand that this is God's world. But the Chet Eitzadas created a concealment. It created a separation between object and subject. Even Adam and Chava themselves, their own being, they were not ashamed of their nakedness. Why not? Because nakedness is part of God's beautiful world, as long as you know it's God's beauty, like a newborn child. But as soon as you become conscious of yourself, and it's no longer, I'm just here to serve the divine. Self-consciousness, consciousness means the separation between object and subject. There's me and my experience. So to put it in very blunt, in very practical terms, you ask somebody, who are you? They'll give you their business card. That's a post Chet Eitzadas response. Your business card is what you do, it's not who you are. Before the Eitzadas, no one would ever do that. Who am I? I'm a Tzelem Elokim, a divine soul with a mission to fulfill in this world. And everything I do, including my work, and including mundane things, and including the beautiful physical things, are here to reveal a higher dimension of the divine. One state from the tree of knowledge, you're no longer connected, so now the sweat of your brow, go earn your bread. Till then, it wouldn't have been that way. The bread would have been given to Adam. He would have gotten the food without effort, because he could focus on elevating the food and doing everything that he has to do to see the divine in everything. Now that you don't see the divine, you have your own agenda, so now you make your own food. And the same thing with Chava, with the birth pangs and so on, without going into all the details. Once a dichotomy is created, then we have to take a lot of care. Are you looking at the beauty of it for your own selfish pleasure or indulging in it, or is it part of the divine? And that's why you have the concept of iskafia and you have the concept of self-discipline. Not, God forbid, is an affront or an insult to God's world, it's an affront to our using God's world for the wrong reason. What does the Gemara say when a person doesn't make a bracha on food? It's like stealing. It's like someone gave you a gift and you don't say thank you. It's not yours. That's the idea. But if you know it's yours and it's completely permeated, it's a whole different story. So we have to have great care now of how we relate to the world around us. Well, a moment into indulgence. And that great care includes, that's why, yes, you'll have Chassidim who were very careful and they ate just a crust of bread, not to indulge in this so-called toxic world. Because now the beauty of God has been toxified by human beings as they misuse it. Gold was created, for example, for the Pesach Mikdash. That's what the Medrash says. But then gold was used for the Baal to build a golden calf. It was used for avoda zarah. So now it's not so simple and say, you know what? I'm using gold just for Pesach Mikdash. First of all, we see most people use gold and they hoard it, and it becomes my accomplishment, my money, my accomplishment. Very little to do with God. In a pure world, gold would be seen only as being a way to beautify and to bring the divine in this world. That's why you have the approach, okay, now you're living in a world like that, you can't just indulge in gold. You can't even be sometimes even the minimum. Maybe you have to sometimes minimize, and case by case, abstain. Abstain not because we're abstaining from the beauty, but we're abstaining from us misunderstanding how that beauty should be used. And then, of course, the Torah tells us when it's not that way. On Shabbos, for example, there's a mitzvah to eat and drink and have pleasure, because Shabbos helps us make it into divine pleasure. Even then, it shouldn't be like a oxen ashtraimel, as the Baal Shem Tov showed his students. Someone sitting with a shtraimel, and it looks like an axe threshing away, because you have to have kaddish asma v'chamutalach in a world like ours. When Mashiach comes, the Rambam says, "Madanim etzim ka'ofer." The sweet delicacies will be abundant like the dust of the earth. We won't even necessarily hoard it because it will be so abundant. That's when we go back to our world where with the entire business of the world is not to indulge, but to see the beauty and see all the blessings of this world as a divine channel, as a way of experiencing and expressing and revealing the divine in existence. And that's where the balance comes in. Now, in our personal lives, each of us has to find that proper balance. By all means, enjoy the beautiful world that God gave, but remember that there's a God in there. If you do that, the Torah says there's ways to do it. When you don't do that, you say, Ilon Zunah, it's a beautiful tree, but you forget what the beauty of that tree is about, that's when you lose. It's like a gazan biyad ha'chetzav, when you know that the axe is only a tool, an instrument of the axeman, fine. But when you start worshiping the axe and forgetting about the axeman, forgetting about the wielder of the instrument, you see the instruments as an end in itself, that's the material world in which we live, which of course we're working on refining and transforming. In the Rebbe's words, the world is ready. All we have to do is open our eyes and see the divine that's already there within everything. Okay. Next question. Moving right along. School strike. In response to the recent school strike, parents question whether this was the right thing to do. What would the Rebbe say about a school strike putting hundreds of kids out of school for weeks? Dear Rabbi Jacobson Shlita, thanks so much for your great service of addressing important issues each week. As you know, the teachers of Besrivka have been on a strike since before Pesach. My daughter is emotionally scarred from this ordeal. She goes to bed crying and has not had a proper structure for a month. Is what the teachers are doing the correct Chassidus Applied approach? At what point is it a necessary step? Hopefully the strike will be over before you have a chance to address this. But we would still like to know what Chassidus says about this, because it's important that teachers, the board, and administration know before they try this again, Chas v'shalom. Looking forward to hearing from you. Okay, so as we know, the strike is over, but because the question is an important one, there is, and I'm going to address it, not just my own opinion here, as I try to do everything what I've seen either directly from the Rebbe or indirectly. So the Rebbe was asked the question by the faculty of Beis Rivka many years ago, when they said the teachers were not being paid, what they should do. And the Rebbe was very adamant that they should go to Rabbanim, but made it very clear Rabbanim have to look at it and make a seder. The Rebbe was not going to solve the problem because it's a halachic issue here. When teachers are in a school and they're not being paid, there's a din in Torah that says about anyone being employed, you cannot withhold payment to a worker. It's just not acceptable. It's a complete lav in the Torah. Especially if some people are paid and others are not paid, that makes things quite more complicated. Now, how this was tolerated for so many years is a good question. Whether the Rabbanim were consulted or not, I don't know the details, but definitely inappropriate. On the other hand, I do not see the Rebbe agreeing that people should strike. If an issue like this would come up, the Rebbe would make it very clear, go to the Rabbanim and they have to come with a psak right now, and not in 5 years from now, not in 10 years, and not in 20 years. So the real crime here was that wasn't resolved earlier. So I'm not here going to judge what teachers who depend on this parnasa did or didn't do. As I said, to condone and say the Rebbe would condone a strike with girls and students not being able to go to school, it's very hard to say yes. But on the other hand, that two wrongs don't make a right. And on the other hand, the issue should have been preempted. Now this reflects on our own community, on inability, at least now hopefully things will change, to deal with such a serious problem. Teachers not being paid for months and months and months for the main school, the girls' school in this community, is just unheard of. And unfortunately, when people get used to it, they just start accepting, okay, what can we do? Which is not the Rebbe's approach. We never ask what we can do. We ask what can we do, not to throw up our hands and say what's going to be. What can we do about it? Now, I bless and hope, and we all do, that the board will do what it has to do to straighten things out. Now, as far as girls, I don't know what to say. It's extremely painful to hear, and you don't even have to hear it, but now that I hear it, that girls, of course, they'd be scarred. They see what's happening in front of their eyes. And these are the adults in their lives, and these are the schools in their lives. How could they have respect for a school that is having all kinds of issues like this? And then go back and say, hey, you have to accept the authority and the Kabbalah sale with the Kabbalah sale of the schools. I don't know how that can be corrected unless maybe with a very transparent approach of addressing the girls and apologizing, and everyone involved should apologize, and explaining that this was never meant to be something that should affect the students. And I think that should not be ignored, and there should be put our heads together, figure out how to address this. And is it going to solve all the issues? I'm sure it won't, but at least transparency and openness, instead of just pushing it under the carpet, is always a healthier approach. That's what I would do with the students. If I were a parent, parents should do that privately, and the school should do it in its way. There is an apology necessary, for, above all, to the Rebbe and to the students. The rest of the adults, let them figure it out. And obviously, everyone deserves what halacha says, be paid on time, and so on. But I'm talking about the children the students were definitely not at fault here. They had nothing to say here. So that we could allow that people like that, which are impressionable, the future generation, who are the guarantors of the Torah, as we'll soon be Kabul the Torah, the children, should be deprived in any way. And even if there wasn't a strike, and knowing that teachers aren't being paid, that is healthy. That's where the big apology has to go. And to me, that's to the Rebbe and to the students. But an apology isn't just an apology. Apology is stating clearly that mistakes were made, and this should never have happened. And now, going forward, this will be repaired, and that's in Shtoken Farfalm, Pesach Sheini. You find out what people are made, what they do after they make mistakes. That's what you find out. Why? Because that's when you see. As I always say, and it's a great line that I've heard from other places that says, no one is perfect in this world. So trust is not built on perfection. Trust is built on accountability. Mistakes were made, mistakes were made. Accountability means you're ready to fess up, you're ready to talk about your knowledge, and you speak openly. And that, I believe, is what needs to be done to help anyone has to heal from this or move forward and say, listen, mistakes were made, we take accountability, but we are making sure that, number one, you know that, and the students had absolutely no reason that they should have been in any way affected by this, which is, of course, even worse than the teachers themselves. Obviously, the teachers deserve to be paid, and I'm not putting any blame on them, of course, but on the other hand, who were the biggest victims here were the ones that had no control altogether over this situation. So I don't know how many more words I can say about this. It's very clear. This is the Rebbe's approach, the importance of chinuch, bonim and bonis, the children that we have, that's the future. And how we deal with this going forward is, of course, the biggest lesson of what we learned, what you've learned from it, and how you move forward and how you grow through the process. And if we show our students, and we show that we grow through our mistakes, that also is a lesson in life. That even if a mistake was made, we don't just ignore it, we grow through it. That's the key. No one can ever forget the lesson that, of all places, everything's Ashgacha Prat is Tylenol. If you remember, Tylenol was discovered in some places in the United States and was the biggest selling pain reliever at the time, after aspirin. Tylenol, now Advil or whatever, but Tylenol was discovered in some pharmacies and some stores to have been tampered with. And a few people died from it, God forbid. And Tylenol got together, their board meeting, and they had big debates what to do. And one said, let's just forget about it, it happened, let's move on. A few people died, it's tragic, we'll do whatever we can for reparations. But we have to move on, and let's not make a fuss, let's not make bigger noise of it. Others came up with other ideas, and then some came up with the idea, no. Not only do we not cover it up, not only do we just minimize it, but we will demonstrate that we will create completely new level and standard and quality of tamper-free medicines. And Tylenol came out with this big ad campaign, spent millions and millions of dollars apologizing, but not just apologizing, but also saying from here on we've learned our lesson, and they doubled and tripled whatever it is, and the public came away, Tylenol went, its stock went up, the sales went up because the people respected that they took responsibility for it. They were accountable. And with accountability was, of course, the key to trust. So though it happened, Tylenol demonstrated a responsible, mature approach that we will make sure never happens again, and they did it at the cost of themselves, demonstrating a much better approach. The airline industry is now having to deal with a similar issue, and I think these are lessons to be learned, even though they're lessons from outside of our community, lessons to be learned for each of us. And you see also the opposite lessons, what happens when people minimize or cover up or try to push it aside, often comes back to bite and haunt. And that's how we educate our children, accountability. Okay, next question. There's a few more follow-ups. So let's do the follow-up, number one, with Rab Moshe. I spoke about Rab Moshe, the Alter Rebbe's son, last week, and I neglected to mention, and I want to apologize for that there is a colleague of mine, Rabbi Elie Matasov, who actually compiled and authored 2 books. I was only aware of one. One more of more for the secular world, or for the larger world, a book on a research on Rab Moshe that has received acclaim, and you can find the references to the Wikipedia on Rab Moshe, because there were those scholars and others who came away with saying Rab Moshe, things happened to him which was prompted the whole question, that were seemingly very inappropriate. And he demonstrates with sources and so on, and as I said, acclaimed by scholars as well, secular scholars as well, that it never happened, that which they suggested about Rab Moshe's behavior. And the second book which he compiled, which is called Tildus Rab Moshe, and there he gathered some of the sources I cited, but much more comprehensively, all the sources from the Frierdiker Rebbe and the Chabad on Rab Moshe, and I mentioned last week the story about it with Rab Moshe and what the Frierdiker Rebbe writes in the Shimas and different sikhs and so on. So I want to acknowledge him for that work, and I want to say that is really a tremendous element in understanding Rab Moshe. So we have actual books that are documented, and I wanted to state that for the record. Now, one follow-up. Another follow-up. Selling a Sefer Torah to non-observant Jews. This was also in episode 159. So here's what was written. What about the possibility or probability that women would be reading from the Torah? Same idea with Tefillin too. As I said, when someone comes to buy a Sefer Torah, nowhere it says in halacha that you have to figure out how they're going to use it. You assume, Kol Yisroel b'cheskes kashas, they'll use it the right way. And that's that. That's why there's no issue with this regard. Someone buys a Sefer, same thing with tefillin, same thing. If someone buys tefillin, the later you find out a woman is using to put on tefillin, the person who sold the tefillin didn't do anything wrong. Now, if you say he knows for sure, and there's a question of lifnei Iyar, fine, that's a question you have to ask a Rav. But I don't see any real difference in how that changes the issue. It just comes down to, there's a Torah, and we teach Torah. If someone teaches Torah and someone uses the Torah for the wrong thing, we say, Divrei Torah eini mekabelin tumah. But even if you know, there's certain things you can do that are responsible for, and certain things you're not responsible for. Okay? Just going quickly through some of the previous, what else do we have from previous? Okay. Asay l'cha Rav. 1 minute, please. The importance of having a mashpia has been discussed time and time again. The stress the Rebbe placed on acquiring one, the importance of having an objective voice of reason, how to find the right mashpia, but should we deal with this? How should one deal with his worries about troubling a mashpia for small matters? What should one do when he or she feels bad to take up the precious time of someone else? Dear Rabbi Jacobson, thank you for these great programs. Can you please tell us how one should go about getting advice from a mashpia? I have many questions, but I feel like I'm taking precious time from mashpia and get the feeling like they have no time for me. So as I was saying till now, accountability, there's a thing called also transparency, which goes hand in hand with accountability. Every one of us needs to have a Asay l'cha Rav. The Rebbe made it very clear, as the Alter Rebbe does in the introduction to Tanya, that a person should not be pravish shiflush shel sheker, which means feigned or displaced humility, and not offer. But people do have lives, and there are people people want to have time. So you talk very openly to your mashpia. Say, I don't want to bother you, but I really respect you, and I really need my advice from you. Can you give me a time that I can speak to you? If indeed you don't have the time, can you suggest another mashpia? I think there's nothing wrong with speaking openly, and that itself is part of a healthy attitude and approach. From mashpia's point of view, people have to make that decision. Someone comes to you, they're in need. In most cases, if you're a person with a little bittul and what the Rebbe says, you try your best. But I'm not here to tell people everybody has their schedules and they don't know how many other people are coming to this person for help. So you have to know how to balance it. So that would be the very practical approach I would take to this. And you don't have to feel, for the person who's the mushpa, doesn't have to feel self-conscious or defensive. You're speaking very openly, and you can say, I don't want to take your time, but I do need your help time to time. Can you tell me what's the best way to approach it? Okay. We do have one more question that was a follow-up with Chav Ches Nissen, but due to time, I'll do that next week. Just want to make sure I have everything covered here. Yeah, a lot of papers to look at. Yeah. So let us go to the Chassidus question. The Chassidus question, which is as follows. Since this is the week of netzach, in the Emor counting, we're in the 4th week, can you please explain the significance of netzach in our personal lives? In addition, the Frierdiker Rebbe's Memorim of Pesach Tafshin Tes 5709 explain that the last and final work in golus is with netzach and hoid. Basel Lagani Tafshin Yud, the famous Basel Lagani, also emphasizes the power of netzach. Can you elaborate and help us apply that idea and its relevance to us today? Also, if netzach means victory, why is it not the final sphere, indicating the final victory over all? Okay, very appropriate. So let's use the the Pesach Memorim from Tafshin Tes, which, by the way, are based on the Rebbe Rashav's Memorim from Tov Fresh Samach Ches, and with a lot of additions. Even there's almost an entire mimer, I believe, that the Frierdiker Rebbe added. And with that, saying exactly that throughout history, the structure of Birur HaNetzutzes, the refinement, goes through the spheres, with the earlier spheres being Chabad, the refinement of the Mechin, then with the Midas, Chesed, Gvura, Tiferes, and the last generation, Netzach and Hoid. The avoda of Netzach and Hoid, and the Frierdiker Rebbe, as the Rebbe Rashab, emphasized that the avoda is not with Giluyim. In the time of the Beis HaMikdash, there was Giluyim, revelations. In the time of Moshe Rabbeinu, there was even greater revelations. Now it's netzach. What's netzach and heid? Sheer determination is netzach. The need to march forward, forge ahead, and do what has to be done. Like foot soldiers, as explained in Basel Lagani, the foot soldiers that go with Kabbalah Sale, they just march ahead. And the heid, just plain Kabbalah Sale. So it's determination and total acceptance. Heid from the word heidah, to acknowledge and accept. To follow orders. So there you have the lesson. Netzach and Heid, as he explains in the elements, he says is Malchus Edem and Malchus Yishmael, the 2 last Goliaths. Not Malchus Bavel, not Malchus Mitzrayim, which is Keser, Bavel is the higher levels, and the other, and Paras Hamadai, and the other. The last is Edem, which is the Roman Christian Western empires, and Yishmael, which is the Ishmaelite, the Muslim Arab empires. And that's the final birur. I've written about this. If you go to meaningfullife.com, you can search for this topic and you'll find pretty extensive articles on these Maimorim. But what it means in simple aces, like he says in Basel Lagani, that today is Anoshim Pshutim, the front line. We do what we're told to do, and you march ahead with determination, without looking back. And you do it with Heidah, with a Hoid. That's what's required, and that is what will finally push and bring the Geula. That's a Chaneid. Yisroel and Malchus have a different role, and that's not relevant to our discussion here. As far as why netzach is not the final sphere, because first of all, netzach is determination in general. It's determination in everything. It's determination in chesed, determination in gvura, determination in teferes, and determination in all the other spheres. And so the word victory, yes, seems to suggest a final victory, but determination is not necessarily a final victory. It's that driving force of determination. I would much more connect to it, to determination, to even ambition, to that forward drive. Nowhere does it say that netzach refers to the final sphere. Malchus is the final sphere, the 7th sphere, which refers to Malchus of Malchus Beis David, Mashiach, and the Geula, like Malchus is Shabbos, the 7th day. So yes, there will be the final victory then. Maybe that's netzach shebe Malchus. But Malchus is really the conclusion of all the spheres in that sense. So I hope that helps a bit. So netzach, in my book, The Spiritual Guide to Counting the Omer, goes through the details of netzach and all the 7 elements in netzach. You can also sign up for a free app called My Omer app, and you can get a daily reminder, plus these exercises with a journal, very powerful app that many people find extremely useful, as well as getting a daily email as well to remind you. So you have 3 different ways. There's the book, there's the app, and there's the email. Then that covers that. Now we'll do the 3 essays in the last contest that concluded right before Pesach, which we always conclude around Chav Zayin Adar time and Yud Aleph Nisan time when we make the announcements. And these are 3 essays, and we'll start with the first one, God and Pain, How to Be Vulnerable and Trust Again, by Avremi Weinberg. age 31, a teacher at YOEC, Los Angeles, California. So this essay, wonderfully done, covers the big topic, how to be vulnerable and trust again, the dilemma that alongside with the joys and beauty of life as we experience it, there inevitably exists tragedy and pain. Our generation's quest for a meaningful perspective on tragedy is seemingly colored by the value we attribute to our experiences. The attempted answer that an infinite God is by definition unknowable and beyond our understanding leaves us unsatisfied. How can our generation, with its emphasis on experience, relate to God amidst our pain? We will explore Chassidic teachings of the Maggid, the Alter Rebbe, and the Rebbe to reach a deep and satisfying resolution. Concepts of Chassidus that we will elucidate and relate to are the holy names of God, Havaya and Adonai, and their great relevance to our lives. And then he goes on to elaborate on why it matters, this question of pain and suffering, what the meaning of suffering is, the three different ways. The Alter Rebbe explains it in Tanya, as brought in the Sichos of the Rebbe. The Rebbe's cry in the famous Sikha about Iyar, when the Jews are suffering, that Hashem is with you in the suffering, and the meaning of that name, the compassion that Hashem shows when a person is in that place, and how one can be vulnerable and trust again. And in summary, he says three things. Meditate that despite the incomprehensible hurt, God is here with me in my pain as a mother caresses and comforts her child. That's Havaya and Adonai. Number two, search for the ray of God's love and compassion even in the hardship. And finally, express your close relationship with God in concrete form through prayer or mitzvah now performed in a deeper and more personal manner than ever before. I'm not really doing justice to the entire essay, so you can see this essay as all essays at meaningfullife.com/MyLife, and go to MyLife and dash hyphen essays 2017, or you can just look at the essays there. There's a directory there, and you can find the essays for this year. Also, if you subscribe to our weekly email, we send out these essays. In the footnotes, very interesting points that he emphasizes that many people don't emphasize regarding this matter from the different sikhs of the Rebbe. So that's essay number 1. The next essay is from, called Dealing with Hate Issues by Tani Schmuckler, 19 years old, Beis Chaya Mushka Seminary, Montreal, Canada. This is a very practical and a powerful essay about how have you ever been annoyed by someone really obnoxious? Far too many people deal with irritating and exasperating situations daily. In this essay, I'll try to offer, God willing, a solution to the far too common problem of being annoyed, otherwise known as baseless hatred. This essay is based on the previous Rebbe's Maimer Isa B'Zeir, as well as chapter 32 of Tanya. It talks about the common problem that we all have, the Band-Aid solutions, but then the Chassidus perspective based on those Mamorim and the Tanya that really breaks it down into a whole way of looking at these type of situations. With practical suggestions, very practical suggestions that I would recommend to anyone reading this. It will make you a little more refined and pause before you do anything. It comes down to reflecting, discussing, and deciding how to behave when you're faced with an annoying situation. Again, I'm not doing full justice to it, but that's the gist of the essay, and breaks it down based on the Maimorim Isa B'Zeir and the Tanya Perek Lamed Beis. So, excellent essay. And then we go to the third one in Hebrew, The Power of Self-Esteem, by Menachem Mendel Wolf, 28 years old, mashpia and Temchet of Netanya, Israel. Hebrew essay that talks about basically exactly that, self-esteem. How self-esteem has been eroding in the world in which we live, and how Chassidus, and the importance of having self-esteem because it's the foundation of everything we do, and the root of the problems in the world in which we live, as I said, and all the consequences, and the solutions Chassidus offers us in looking and finding that good within our souls, and the idea that God's kindness, that He blesses us with that goodness, how we can actually reveal it, interestingly brings from the Zohar, Chassidus brings that when you praise someone and you compliment them, you draw out those qualities and from a more latent state. And finally, a model for self-development and actualizing a person's positive contribution with real practical steps as the essays are required to do. An excellent essay, again, that I believe can have a true contribution to anyone who reads it. in regard to building your own self-esteem. So with that, we covered the essays. I just wanted to add a little footnote to something I didn't mention earlier. As I mentioned, I usually try to cross-reference. The topic of Aseh L'Charav were discussed at length in episodes 20, 74, 98, 140, and 141. So that's an addendum to that piece I spoke about a little earlier. And the topic of Pesach Sheini was discussed in episodes 66 and 116. So I just wanted to add that. With that, we will sign off here for now. This has been MyLife Chassidus Applied, episode 161. Everyone should have a very blessed week, a refined week, a week that tells a story, and a week that counts. But ultimately, with the real goal of illuminating ourselves and everyone around us, especially our children and our students and those that we educate and are responsible for, because they are the ones that will shape the future. And we should all merit, as I mentioned last week, the Sefer Torah is a auspicious time for the coming of the Geula. To the Geula Amitis Vashlema, and until next Sunday, 8 to 9 p.m., everyone be well. Thank you.